Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video, we will understand variables and constants, different ways of initializations, properties of variable and constants. Also, we'll learn about different data types, how we can store the data in the memory, and at the end, we will learn what happens when you read or write the variable. Let's understand the variable first. So when we execute a program in our computer, it will take certain memory in RAM. And a variable is a container or the box in memory which is used to store some data. Each box has some label on it which we generally call as a variable name, or in more specific words, an identifier. As word identifier itself means a name which used to identify something, so that should be unique. Okay, let's understand why we use variables. So, when you want to use the data more than once, then we can store them in a box or variable and we can use it multiple times. Okay, let's understand what actions we can perform with the variables. First of all, we can create a new variable, so which basically allocates some memory in RAM. And the second one is we can write a variable or put something on a variable. Third, we can get the value. That means we can read the variables. And at the end, we can destroy or delete the variable as well in some cases. Let's understand each point practically with the code. First, we will create a variable which is also known as variable declaration. To create a variable, we have to write data type and the variable name followed with a semicolon. Now, I want to put some value on a variable. When we write data on a variable first time, that is called variable initialization. So now, I want to declare and initialize the variable at the same time. So, we can do like this: int xyz equal to 20 and the semicolon. So while creating only, we are initializing the value. Let's understand other ways to initialize the variable. Int mno, and in the bracket we can put the value. That is called constructor initialization. And we also have unified initialization, where we will put the values in the curly brackets. Now I am going to read the values of variables and print on the console. So let's print abc, and I'll print for all xyz, mno, and ijk as well. Now I will compile the code. We have a.cpp file and I want a.out, so I'll compile it and now I'll run on terminal. So now we have all the values printed on the terminal. Now let's understand how we can delete the variables. So we cannot delete all the variables. We can only delete the variables which is created with the new keyword, or in other words, we can only delete the variables which is created in the heap memory. Let's create one. So I'll create integer type of variable pqr, and I'll use new keyword to allocate the memory in heap, and I'll initialize the value with 50. Now I want to print the value, but we have to put pointer, and while printing also we have to put dereferencing operator. Now I will delete the variable pqr, and let's jump to the terminal again. I'll again compile the code and run it again. It will print all the values till 50. Let's see what happens when you delete a local variable. So now I will delete abc variable which we have created locally, and compiler given an error. It is saying delete keywords expecting a pointer, but we have given the integer. So let's give the pointer or address to the variable. It only given a warning because the memory is not allocated by the user as its non-heap object, but the code is successfully compiled. Now let's understand the properties of a variable or constants. So the first thing is a variable can have some name, or we are also calling it identifier. It can be like myvar or some boolean flag, something like is active. So these are the variables, variable names. Now, the second thing is variable can have some values. So it can store some data on it. It depends on the data type. Like it can be integer, string, or it can be float value. It can be anything, right? Now, a variable is having some data type. Data type defines what type of data it will store. So for example, data type can be int, bool, it can be float, it can be like string, it can be anything, right? It can be object as well. Now the next thing is a variable is having some scope where you can access the variable, where you can read or write the variable. We will learn each thing in detail soon. Now coming to the next part, each variable is having some lifetime. So the lifetime is like when it will destroy. So different types of variables having different types of lifetime. It depends on where you are creating the variables. Okay, now coming to the next point. So as we learned, variables are created in the memory. So each variable is having a memory address from where we can access the variables. So these are the base address from where you can start reading the value of a variable. Okay, next and last, access permissions. So access permission means it depends on what type of variable. If you are creating a constant, you can only read it. If you are creating a variable, you can write also. So we have some kind of read-write permissions. So if we use const keyword, we are making a constant variable. So we can only read the value, we cannot write. Okay. And in the normal variables, we can read and write the variables. So we'll discuss these things in detail. So this is the overview of the properties. Now let's understand each properties in depth. So first one is name. In C++, we have certain conventions or rules to select a variable name, which our developers should follow to write a clean code. First one is name can contain letters, digits, and underscores. The next thing is name must begin with a letter or an underscore. It cannot start with the digits. For example, it can be ABC underscore 26. It can be underscore ABC 26, but it cannot be 26 underscore ABC. So this is wrong. The third thing is names are case sensitive. For example, myvar is not equal to myvar. If you see here, these are the small letter and the capital letter. So both are treated as a different variables. Name cannot contain a white space or special characters. For example, it cannot contain spaces, exclamation mark, hash, or percent, or dollar. So these are the invalid characters for a variable name. Okay, the next thing is you cannot use keywords as variable name. For example, you cannot use for or int if. So these are not a valid variable names. So we have some of the rules. Also, we have some guidelines. So guidelines can also depends on the company or the project you're working on. So these are the some basic guidelines. For example, use camel case conventions for classes, for class names, structures, and type def. And for the variables, lowercase with underscore separated. For the global variables, put G and then start the variable name. So G is a prefix for the global variable. For the static variables, put S as a prefix. And for the global constant variables, use C as a prefix. These guidelines help developers to understand what type of variable they are referring throughout the code. So till now we learned about the identifier rules and the guidelines. In the next video, we'll learn about the other properties.